Part 40 begins at the point where analysis turns into legacy, where a single confrontation stops being a headline and starts becoming a reference point. What happened between Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi was not just oversight theater, it was a defining stress test of how modern democracy handles uncomfortable history, and woven into every exchange was the unavoidable gravity of Jeffrey Epstein, not as a sensational detail, but as a symbol of systemic vulnerability and institutional hesitation. Crockett's insistence on explicit acknowledgement of survivors pierced the procedural atmosphere like a moral alarm bell. Bondi's steady reliance on historical and legal framing functioned like a structural counterweight, reinforcing the principle that institutions cannot be judged outside the framework in which they operated. That clash, alarm bell versus structural brace, is what elevated the moment beyond routine questioning. What makes this chapter especially powerful is that it revealed the anatomy of institutional discomfort. Crockett's line of questioning compressed years of public frustration into pointed, present-tense accountability. Her insistence suggested that recognition is not optional, that without it, procedural explanations ring hollow. In contrast, Bondi's composure signaled that institutional credibility depends on resisting the pull of retrospective reinterpretation. Her framing emphasized that decisions are made within constraints, guided by laws and norms that may not align perfectly with present-day expectations. The friction between these positions exposed a core democratic dilemma: how to reconcile evolving moral awareness with fixed historical context. This tension resonates because it mirrors a broader societal debate. Across institutions, there is increasing demand for acknowledgement of harm, not as a footnote but as a foundational step toward trust. Crockett embodied that demand. She translated abstract oversight into a human-centered narrative, forcing the room to confront impact rather than just documentation. Bondi, however, embodied another equally powerful expectation, that institutions must maintain continuity and resist the impulse to rewrite their own history under pressure. Her steadiness was not necessarily indifference, it was a defense of structural coherence. The collision of these expectations is what made the exchange feel charged rather than routine. The enduring weight of Epstein's legacy amplifies this collision. The case represents more than individual wrongdoing. It represents questions about influence, accountability, and institutional blind spots. In that context, every word spoken in the hearing carried symbolic weight. Crockett's insistence communicated that systems must visibly learn from past failures. Bondi's defense communicated that learning must occur without dismantling procedural integrity. Viewers, depending on their perspective, may have aligned with one or the other. But the deeper truth is that both impulses, reform and stability, are essential to democratic resilience. Another dimension worth noting is how this exchange redefined expectations for public oversight. It demonstrated that acknowledgement cannot remain implicit. Survivors and advocates saw their concerns articulated directly in an official setting. Observers saw that institutional actors are required not only to explain what happened, but to articulate how they understand its human consequences. At the same time, the exchange reaffirmed that legal systems operate within defined limits. That reaffirmation is crucial because public trust depends not just on empathy, but on predictability and fairness in process. As the moment settles into institutional memory, its impact will likely surface in subtle but meaningful ways. Future hearings may open with clearer acknowledgments. Officials may prepare more thoroughly for moral as well as procedural scrutiny. Lawmakers may refine how they frame questions to ensure that human consequence is explicitly addressed. These are not dramatic shifts, but democracy often evolves through incremental recalibration rather than sweeping transformation. And recalibration begins with moments of visible tension like this one. So the final reflection of this chapter is not about confrontation for its own sake, it is about balance. The exchange between Crockett and Bondi revealed that justice in a democratic system requires both moral articulation and procedural discipline. Too much emphasis on one risks undermining the other. But when both are forced into dialogue, even sharp, uncomfortable dialogue, institutions are compelled to clarify who they are and what they stand for. That clarity is not immediate redemption, nor is it definitive closure. It is something quieter but more durable, a recalibrated standard. And for citizens watching, the lesson is equally clear. Accountability does not end when the questioning stops. It continues in the expectations we carry forward, the scrutiny we maintain, and the balance we insist upon between empathy and structure.